Introduced at the fourth round of the 1976 season in Spain, the Ferrari 312 T2 was the second iteration of Ferrari's 312T line, powered by a 3-litre flat 12 engine and driven by Niki Lauda, Clay Resurgence and Carlos Reutemann. The car would see Ferrari take championship success for the second year running, albeit only in the Constructors' Championship. The cool and calculating Niki Lauda would achieve 3 wins in the 312 T2, with his other 2 wins of the season coming in the earlier 312T. All of his victories, however, were taken before his devastating and life-threatening crash at the Nürburgring, interrupting his championship battle with McLaren's James Hunt. Despite his severe injuries and missing 2 rounds, he came back to race at the Italian Grand Prix, scoring 4th and then scoring a 3rd place podium 2 rounds later. Ultimately though, he failed to win the Drivers' Championship, retiring from the final round in Japan, citing safety concerns over the harsh weather. Nevertheless, this was one of the greatest comebacks in all of sporting history, and for that, we can celebrate him. Introduced at the 3rd round of the 1979 World Championship, the Ferrari 312 T4 was driven by Gilles Villeneuve and Jody Scheckter to championship glory. The car was instantly successful upon its debut, achieving 2 1-2 finishes in a row in favour of Gilles Villeneuve. The car was extremely mechanically reliable for this time period, recording only a single mechanical retirement across the entire 15-race season. The car would achieve 6 race victories, 3 for each of its drivers, and 7 other podiums, all of which were 2nd place finishes. The championship battle was tightly fought between the 2 Ferrari drivers, and later a resurgence at Alan Jones of Williams. Ultimately, Ferrari would practically dominate in the Constructors' Championship, and Jody Scheckter would just about edge out Gilles Villeneuve for Drivers' Championship glory, having scored a bit more consistently over the season. Unfortunately, despite its dominance, the 312 T4's performance fell off towards the end of the season, a sign of things to come for the 1980 season, where Ferrari would have their worst season ever. Ferrari's challenger for the 1988 season was the F137 88C. Developed from the previous year's F187 and driven by drivers Michael Alboreto and Gerhard Berger, the car proved to be no match for that year's dominant McLaren MP4/4. It was one of the few remaining turbocharged cars that took part in that season, with most teams switching to naturally aspirated engines in preparation for the 1989 season, where turbocharged engines would be banned. As such, Ferrari merely adapted the F187 for the 1988 rules, which is why it was so off the pace, only scoring a single pole position, but most importantly, a surprise and welcome 1-2 victory at home at Monza, the first victory and 1-2 for the Scuderia since the death of their founder, Enzo Ferrari. Other than that, the Ferraris could only afford to pick up the scraps that the McLarens left over and finished a pretty distant second place in the championship. The Ferrari 641, also known as the F190, was Ferrari's challenger for the 1990 F1 season, driven by then three-time world champion Alain Prost and Nigel Mansell. The car was an evolution of the previous year's quick but unreliable 640 or F189, and it proved to be much more reliable than its predecessor. However, compared to its immediate championship rival, the McLaren MP4/5B, the 641 suffered a little bit in qualifying pace. Prost and the McLaren of Senna would trade wins all season long in their championship battle, with Prost achieving 5 Grand Prix victories and its teammate Mansell achieving 1. Ultimately, the championship came down to a first lap, first turn crash at the Japanese Grand Prix, which saw Prost knocked out of title contention, and with Mansell retiring in the exact same Grand Prix, Ferrari's hopes of a constructors' victory also fell through. Contesting the entirety of the 1992 season, the F92A was driven by Ivan Capelli and Jean Alesi in what was a disastrous season. Despite using an ingenious double-bottomed floor that produced a great amount of downforce, the car was held back by an unreliable and underpowered V12 engine. Ferrari, unwilling to admit that their engine was the problem, instead blamed the concept of the car and didn't repeat it for the next year. With the car being underpowered and unreliable, that meant it could only achieve 8 points finishes across the 16-race season, only managing to score an ignominious 21 points and 4th place in the Constructors, a whopping 70 points behind third-placed Benetton. The F92A managed only 2 third-place podium finishes across the season, and Ivan Capelli would later go on to call it the worst F1 car he had ever driven. Competing in the 1995 season, the 412 T2 was Ferrari's, and indeed Formula One's, last ever V12 powered car. Driven by Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger for the entirety of the season, the car was quick, but it wasn't quick or reliable enough to contend with the Renault-powered Williams and Benettons. The car retired from several Grand Prix, especially towards the end of the season, with a certain double retirement coming at the Italian Grand Prix, when Alesi's car would fail with just 8 laps to go, but not before one of its TV cameras fell off and broke his teammate Berger's suspension. Despite the poor results and the run of retirements, the car did at least achieve one Grand Prix victory, with Jean Alesi achieving his one and only race win at the Canadian Grand Prix, helping to secure Ferrari third in the Constructors' Championship. Competing in the 1996 season, the odd-looking and ungainly F310 was Ferrari's challenger, driven by reigning champion Michael Schumacher and Eddie Irvine. The car had front-running pace and could achieve podiums at the beginning of the season, but its new 3-litre V10 engine had teething problems, causing many mechanical retirements across the season, including 8 in a row for Eddie Irvine. Despite not having the outright pace to match the dominant Williams FW18s, the F310 was able to pick up a handful of wins across the season, all due to Michael Schumacher, starting with a masterclass in the wet at Spain, earning Schumacher his nickname, the Rennmeister. Despite these successes, the car has not been looked fondly upon by its two drivers, who've called it many things, from an awful car to a parachute. Contesting the 1999 F1 season, the F399 would be driven by Michael Schumacher, Eddie Irvine and Mika Salo, with Salo acting as a substitute driver for Schumacher, who suffered a broken leg following a crash during the formation lap of the British Grand Prix. This put Irvine into the unusual position of fighting for the Drivers' Championship instead of Schumacher, and to his credit, he fought well, scoring 4 Grand Prix victories across the season, the only race victories of his career. Both championships would go down to the wire at the final round in Japan, with Irvine narrowly missing out on championship glory by just 2 points. Constructors' glory, however, would go to Ferrari for the first time since 1983, winning over McLaren by 4 points, and beginning Ferrari's run of dominance. A development of the previous F300 and F399 cars, the F1 2000 was Ferrari's challenger for the 2000 Formula 1 season. Using a new, wider-angled V10 engine, the F1 2000 was generally considered to be the second fastest car of the season, behind the McLaren MP4-15. Despite this, the car was wrangled to championship glory in the hands of Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello, with Barrichello achieving an emotional first race victory at the German Grand Prix, and Schumacher achieving 9 race victories across the season, easily putting him into the championship lead, despite a run of poor performances in the middle of the season. Schumacher ultimately secured his 3rd Formula 1 World Championship at the Japanese Grand Prix, and Ferrari's first Drivers' Championship since Jody Scheckter in 1979. A wait of 21 years. Introduced at the third round of the 2002 Formula 1 Championship, and following on from the dominant F2001, the F2002 continued the championship-winning form that Schumacher had begun the previous year, and the race-winning performances of the first two races. The moment that the car took over from the F2001, the F2002 proved to be incredibly dominant, with Schumacher never finishing off the podium the entire season, even the first two races he had the previous year's car. The car would also perform well in the hands of Rubens Barrichello, who achieved 4 race victories in the car himself, including at the Italian Grand Prix. The car was so dominant that it achieved 9 1-2 finishes, including a run of 5 at the end of the season, easily bagging championship glory in both Drivers' and Constructors' Championships, and also one final race victory in the 2003 season. When Ferrari tested the F2004, they thought they must have got something wrong, that the car must be illegal because there was no way it was actually that fast. But it was actually that fast, and the F2004 was, for many years, the fastest Formula 1 car ever built. As a result, Ferrari dominated the entire season, only dropping 3 Grand Prix victories. Of those 15, Schumacher won an astonishing 13 of them. And had it not been for an unfortunate retirement at the Monaco Grand Prix, that could have been 14 race victories and 13 race wins in a row, which would have been the most dominant run of victories in Formula 1. The car was so fast and so dominant that for many years it held the race lap records at several circuits, and remains unbeaten at some of them. Ferrari's run of dominance was long over by the time the F2007 hit the scene. Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello were also gone, replaced by Kimi Raikkonen and Felipe Massa. The car won on its debut at the Australian Grand Prix at the hands of Kimi Raikkonen, and it enjoyed moderate success over the season, having a reasonably close fight with the much stronger McLaren. The McLaren was generally a much better car than the F2007 and would have won the Constructors' Championship had it not been for the Spygate scandal that saw the team excluded from the 2007 championship. This handed Ferrari the Constructors' Championship on a silver platter, and then Kimi Raikkonen surprised everyone by winning the Drivers' Championship by a single point at the final round of the season in Brazil. This is to date the most recent Drivers' Championship that Ferrari have won, and after winning the 2008 Constructors, the team would enter yet another championship drought. Ferrari's car for the 2010 championship season was the F10, driven by Fernando Alonso and Felipe Massa. The car was an immediate improvement over its direct predecessor, the F60, winning with a 1-2 on debut in Bahrain. After this, however, the car's pace was clearly not good enough compared to the McLaren and the Red Bull, and much of the middle of the season would be dominated by those two teams, with Ferrari failing to score another victory until the German Grand Prix, the one with the infamous "Fernando is faster than you" message. Although the car's pace was better after the summer break, scoring 3 victories and a smattering of other podiums, the poor run of form beforehand prevented Ferrari from taking Constructors' Championship glory. Drivers' Championship glory would also fall through Fernando Alonso's fingers by just 4 points at the final round, after he spent half the race held up behind the Renault of Vitaly Petrov. Initially known as the Ferrari F150 before Ford stepped in, the 150 150, apologies for butchering the name, was Ferrari's car for the 2011 Formula 1 season. The car was a notable downgrade from the previous F10 and was rarely on the pace of the leading Red Bull and sometimes even the McLaren. In the hands of Fernando Alonso, the car could achieve only a single Grand Prix victory at the British Grand Prix and 9 other podiums, whilst Felipe Massa didn't stand on the podium at all. In a season that was dominated by Red Bull, Ferrari ended up only picking up the scraps from when Red Bull and McLaren made mistakes. And in the end they finished a rather distant 3rd in the Constructors' Championship, some way behind McLaren, but way ahead of 4th placed Mercedes. The Ferrari F2012 would compete in the 2012 Formula 1 season, and it was the last Ferrari to use this naming convention. The pace of the car during pre-season testing was worrying, but in one of the most competitive seasons in recent Formula 1 history, the F2012 found its pace wildly fluctuating across the season, taking an unexpected victory in the second round in Malaysia. Fernando Alonso managed to wrangle incredible results out of this car, despite how bad it was, and the pace of the car did seem to at least level off at a decent level after the summer break, finishing on the podium every single round, except for Belgium and Japan, and never the top step. Ferrari lost the Constructors' battle at the penultimate round in Austin, whilst the Drivers' Championship came down to the wire at the final round in Brazil, with Alonso narrowly missing out. Named in honour of the last year of the naturally aspirated V8 engines, the F138 was Ferrari's 2013 challenger. Still driven by Fernando Alonso and Felipe Massa, the F138 appeared to have good pace in the early half of the season, winning 2 races, including Alonso's home Grand Prix in Spain. By the Hungarian Grand Prix, however, Red Bull already had a substantial lead in the Constructors' Championship, and Mercedes had overtaken Ferrari. After the summer break, however, Ferrari had no answer for Red Bull's pace, let alone Mercedes, and they continued to fall further behind in the Constructors' Championship, were eventually finishing 3rd, with Alonso finishing a distant 2nd place in the Drivers' Championship. This would be Felipe Massa's final season with the Scuderia, ending his tenure with the team with a whimper, only scoring a single podium in the entire season. Driven by Fernando Alonso in his last year of competition with the Scuderia and the returning Kimi Raikkonen, the F14T was Ferrari's challenger for the 2014 season, and Ferrari's first turbocharged car since the F187-88C. The F14T, nicknamed the vacuum cleaner due to its odd-looking nose, was an awful car, becoming the first Ferrari since 1993 to fail to win a single race. Whilst not unreliable, the 059/3 engine was underpowered compared to the Mercedes power unit, and the drivability of the car was so poor that it was often said to understeer and oversteer at the same time. The car could only manage 2 measly podiums, both at the hands of Fernando Alonso, and the team finished a disappointing 4th place in the Constructors' Championship. After spending 5 seasons with the Scuderia, Fernando Alonso called it quits and moved to McLaren for the 2015 season. Ferrari would retain Kimi Raikkonen for the 2015 season and replace Fernando Alonso with 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel. Together, they would pilot the SF15T, a marked improvement over the F14T. Vettel would score a 3rd place podium on his debut in red, and then score a victory for the Scuderia in the 2nd round in Malaysia, briefly igniting hopes that the season would not be dominated by the Silver Arrows. Whilst these hopes did fall through, Vettel and Raikkonen continued to score as best as they could, with Vettel scoring 2 additional victories in the car at Hungary and a dominant run in Singapore, where he scored his first pole position for the team. The 3 Grand Prix victories and 13 other podiums that the team scored that season were not enough to overhaul Mercedes, but they were enough to secure 2nd place in the Constructors' Championship, a strong start to Vettel's career in red. The first Ferrari since 1993 to feature a large amount of white on the car, the SF16H was Ferrari's challenger for the 2016 season, and it wasn't a good one. After winning 3 races in the previous season, Ferrari yet again failed to win a single Grand Prix. They scored several podiums, but the car's pace fell off after the Austrian Grand Prix, only managing to score 2 podiums after that. The car's pace was compounded by an unreliable and fragile turbocharger, the fix for which added an additional 2 kilograms of weight to the car. The car's poor pace after Austria, coupled with 7 retirements, meant that Ferrari fell to 3rd in the Constructors' Championship, behind Red Bull, finishing a distant 70 points behind the Milton Keynes-based team. This drop-off in pace, however, could also be explained by Ferrari's shifting development to their next generation 2017 car. Ferrari's next generation 2017 car was this, the SF70H, and it started the season in smooth style with a victory on debut. Sebastian Vettel led the championship charge, challenging Mercedes for the first time in the turbo hybrid era. Vettel would stand on the podium for the next 5 rounds, finishing second 3 times and first twice, including an incredible victory in Monaco. His championship rival Hamilton, however, would continue to show good performances in his Mercedes, and ultimately Vettel would lose the Drivers' Championship lead at the Italian Grand Prix. Whilst the pace of the SF70H was good, it clearly wasn't good enough compared to the Mercedes W08, and both titles would fall out of Ferrari's and Vettel's hands. Despite the disappointment, the SF70H still performed well, scoring 5 victories across the season, including at the penultimate round in Brazil, and 15 other podiums, finishing second in the Constructors' Championship. Competing in the 2018 season, the SF71H again started the year with a bang, scoring 2 victories in a row in Australia and Bahrain. The car was incredibly quick, perhaps suspiciously so. Sebastian Vettel would again fight with Lewis Hamilton for championship glory, but ultimately he and Ferrari were just not consistent enough. Whilst Vettel drove well and took the car to 4 Grand Prix victories before the summer break, a potential 5th victory was squandered in an embarrassing accident at the German Grand Prix, his home race, when he slid off the damp track and into a gravel trap. This handed the lead of both championships to Hamilton and Mercedes, and although Vettel would start the second half of the season with a victory in Belgium, a series of embarrassing spins saw his championship charge definitively end. This car was also Kimi Raikkonen's last Ferrari, and he scored his 21st and final Grand Prix victory in the SF71H. Competing in the 2019 Formula 1 season, the SF90H would be driven by Sebastian Vettel and Monegasque Charles Leclerc. The car was clearly outperformed by the Mercedes W10, though it did perform reasonably well. Circumstances prevented Ferrari from winning any races before the summer break, with an engine issue denying Charles Leclerc's first victory in Bahrain, a Max Verstappen masterclass preventing Leclerc from winning again in Austria, and a controversial penalty in Canada preventing Sebastian Vettel from taking victory. The team would start the second half of the season, however, with a run of 3 victories in a row, with Leclerc taking victory in Belgium and Italy, and Vettel taking his 53rd and final race victory of his career in Singapore. This brief run of dominance, however, would be ended by mechanical reliability, a new technical directive, and a clash between the teammates at the Brazilian Grand Prix, meaning the Scuderia would finish a distant second in the Constructors. Competing in the shortened 2020 season, the Ferrari SF1000, named in commemoration of the team's 1000th Grand Prix, would be a disaster compared to its previous efforts, likely due to the fact that Ferrari had been not so honest with their fuel flow rates the previous year. As such, the car was underpowered and draggy, performing poorly all season long, and only managing to score 3 podiums, with the final podium coming at the hands of a disillusioned Sebastian Vettel, who was already slated for a replacement before the season even began. The team would have their worst season since 1980, finishing only 6th in the Constructors' Championship with only 131 points, being threatened by Red Bull's sister team AlphaTauri, becoming the 3rd Ferrari in 6 years to fail to win a race. A mandatory evolution of the SF1000, the SF21 would be driven by Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz, who replaced Sebastian Vettel. The team would have a much more competitive season, despite the fact that they ended development of the car at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, only 6 rounds into the season. The Scuderia would have a season-long battle with McLaren for 3rd in the championship, and although they eventually came out on top in the end, this battle could have been decided much sooner had Leclerc not crashed his car in Monaco qualifying, preventing him from starting that race from pole position and essentially guaranteeing the victory. Another win slipped out of Leclerc's fingers at the British Grand Prix after he led for 50 laps, only to be overtaken by Hamilton just 2 laps away from the end. Ferrari would finish the season a distant 3rd behind the top 2 teams, but it was at least a step in the right direction. Competing in the 2022 season, the F175 would be driven to victory in the season opening round in Bahrain, taking advantage of a double Red Bull retirement and scoring a 1-2 victory, their first since Singapore 2019. Whilst the car was quick, it soon proved to be unreliable, not just mechanically, but in the strategy department as well, with engine failures in Spain and Azerbaijan and a strategy blunder in Monaco preventing a race victory for Leclerc. Despite the pace of the F175, the team and its drivers were unable to capitalise on it, scoring their last Grand Prix victory in Austria, with the team's championship challenge fizzling out in France when Leclerc embarrassingly crashed out from the lead, with the team ultimately finishing a distant second place. The SF23 would start the season poorly, with Leclerc suffering an engine failure and retiring from third place in the season opening Bahrain Grand Prix. For much of the first half of the season, the car was slower than even the Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso, languishing in fourth place until the Italian Grand Prix, where they finally managed to get their act together and start picking up more consistent podiums. Though a couple of pole positions did go to waste. The car did have the distinction, however, of being the only car to win a race that season that wasn't a Red Bull, denying Red Bull a clean sweep of the season, mirroring the 1988 season. With first in the constructors out of reach, Ferrari made a charge for second, ultimately coming up short by just 3 points behind Mercedes. Ferrari went into the 2024 season with high expectations. The SF24 looked fast, and it had to be fast if it was to impress its future driver Lewis Hamilton, who would replace Carlos Sainz at the end of the season. In what looked set to be another season dominated by Red Bull, the SF24 performed well the first few races, scoring a few podiums and also an incredible debut drive for Oliver Behrman, replacing the sick Carlos Sainz. Sainz and Leclerc would capitalise off a rare mechanical retirement for Max Verstappen, scoring a 1-2 victory in Australia. The car would achieve 4 more race victories across the season, including the 2 most important for the team, with Leclerc winning his home Grand Prix in Monaco for the first time ever, and also bringing the Scuderia home in first place for the Italian Grand Prix, for the first time since 2019, with Leclerc bringing home another victory in Austin, Texas, and Sainz bringing home the car's final victory in Mexico, which was also the race where they took second in the Constructors' Championship from the faltering Red Bull. The pace of the car was strong most of the time, and they found themselves fighting for Constructors' Championship glory for the first time since 2018. Sadly, despite several strong performances in the second half of the season, Ferrari would ultimately fall short of Constructors' glory by just 14 points. Despite their failure to win the Constructors, Ferrari was buoyed by their performance across the season, and took it as a positive sign that they could fight for both championships in 2025. Will Charles Leclerc be champion for the first time, or will Hamilton be champion for the 8th? Or will they fail yet again?